Hello music fans, welcome back to the Death by Unicorn channel for another installment of What's New 2022, where I talk about new albums that came out in the metal, rock, and progressive music genres over the past week. So I listened to 4 albums that came out on November 11th and one that came out on November 7th, and I'll talk about them in my order of preference, starting with He Is Legend and their album Endless Hallway. This is their 7th album. It's hard rock, but there's a lot of influences in there from metal, hardcore, alternative, psychedelic, sludge, southern rock, and even some progressive rock influences in there too. And this was my most anticipated album of the quarter. I love everything He Is Legend has released throughout their career. They're a highly underrated band that deserves to be more popular. Their sound has evolved quite a bit over their career, from their post-hardcore metalcore beginnings to more of this hard rock sound with a lot of like heavy metal, progressive, experimental, and stoner rock influences, as well as alternative rock, experimental already, psychedelic, sludge metal, southern rock, all kind of thrown in. If you put all those styles in a mixing pot, you have the new He Is Legend sound. Now, I love the tempo changes and dynamic changes throughout the album. The vocals are great, mostly catchy and melodic singing with the occasional intense scream, but I think even people who aren't as into screaming vocals could like this album because they're used sparingly. The chugging guitars just make me groove and bang my head, but they also have nice ambient leads and textures in their songs as well on the guitar. And He Is Legend's just one of the most consistently solid bands out there. I don't know if they've ever made an album that I would say is 10 out of 10, but they've basically cranked out 7, 9 out of 10 albums in a row for me. And as of right now, this is in my top 5 albums of the year so far. And that's saying a lot because I've listened to about 270 new albums this year so far. He Is Legend always delivers quality. The riffs, the melodies, the grooves are great. Next, I'll talk about an album from Zeke Sky called Intergalactic Demon King. This is his 2nd album, and it's progressive metal. And this Zeke guy can shred. He plays a mean guitar. He writes some cool prog metal music. In a music video I saw, he is playing the guitar parts while also singing, and if he can pull that off live, that's some impressive multitasking. The guitar playing reminds me of Protest the Hero and the Human Abstract, with all the sweeping and tapping and fast leads, and he sings some great melodic hooks. Also lets out some intense screams from time to time as well. Check it out if you're a fan of Protest the Hero, the Human Abstract, and bands like that. Third, I'm going to talk about an album that came out November 7th. Those last 2 just came out on November 11th, but this one's from November 7th, and it's by a band called Galahad, and the album's called The Last Great Adventurer. It's progressive rock, and this band has a confusing discography, so it's hard for me to say what album this is for them. Prog Archives lists this as their 15th album. Wikipedia says they have 14 tapes released, 6 LPs, 10 studio CDs, and 6 live CDs, and 5 EPs. So it seems like they might release different works in different formats. And I had never listened to a full album of theirs, but I put it on my radar because I like to check out pretty much any new release in the progressive rock world. And this one's pretty solid, didn't disappoint. It won't make my top 40 of the year or anything like that, but it's pretty solid, a well done progressive rock album. If you're a fan of classic prog bands like Yes and Genesis, you'll like this, but it's definitely got a bit more like modern production styles, but is inspired by that classic prog sound. Fourth album I'm going to talk about is by the band Chelsea Grin, and it's called Suffer in Hell. And this is their 6th album, and it's Deathcore. It's only about 27 minutes long, 8 tracks, but it goes pretty hard. And apparently they're going to follow this up by an album in 2023 called Suffer in Heaven, and they go together kind of like a double album, but they release them at different times. If you're a fan of deathcore bands like Lorna Shore, you'll probably like this. A lot of brutal death growls and high shrieks. So this one's definitely the most brutal and intense of the albums I'm talking about today. Lots of breakdowns. One track on here features Trevor from the Black Dahlia murder, who unfortunately passed away this year, so rest in peace, Trevor. And lastly, I'm going to talk about an album from Epica. I think it's an EP actually. It's called the Alchemy Project EP. And this is symphonic metal. And it features a lot of collaborative tracks with other artists like Flesh God Apocalypse, Bjorn Strid from Soilwork, Tommy Karavik from Camelot, Phil Lanzin from Uriah Heep, and more. If you're a fan of bands like Arion and Nightwish, you'll like this. There's female vocals on here, mostly in an operatic style, so check it out if you like that kind of opera-inspired metal. And then a lot of the male vocals on here are harsher scream vocals. And that's it for today, for today's episode of What's New 2022. Stay tuned for more in the future. Till then, peace out.